All right, so today we're going to talk about what might be the most famous and most important breakup in history. We're diving into the story of how the American colonies called it quits with Great Britain, and then tried to figure out how to build a new life, a new union, all on their own. You know, it all really kicks off with these words. They're probably the most famous lines from the Declaration of Independence. And they weren't just some fancy announcement. This was a radical new idea about what a government should be and where its power actually comes from. And yeah, historians aren't kidding when they call it a breakup letter. It really was. It wasn't just, we're leaving. It was a detailed list of all the reasons why. It was the colonies telling Great Britain and the whole world, it's not me, it's you, and here's exactly why. So, you gotta ask, right? How did things get so bad that this was the only way out? And maybe just as important, what happens after a breakup like that? What do you do next? Well, let's get into it. Every breakup has a backstory, and this one's a doozy. For a long time, the relationship between Britain and the colonies was actually pretty chill. Britain had this policy of salutary neglect, which is just a fancy way of saying they mostly left the colonies alone to run themselves. But then, a huge, incredibly expensive war changed everything. I mean, talk about whiplash. Before the French and Indian War, things were relaxed, hands off. The colonies were used to being independent. But after the war, Britain was broke, like massively in debt. And they looked at the colonies and said, hey, we protected you, now it's time to pay up. That switch from being left alone to suddenly having a hand in their pocket, that was the beginning of the end. And this need for money set off a chain reaction. Britain started taking actions that to them seemed fair, but to the colonists felt like tyranny. This is where things start to go downhill fast. It's like every action Britain took was just another line in that breakup letter they didn't even know was being written yet. And what's really crazy is the speed of it all. Look at this timeline. We're talking about a relentless series of acts over just one decade. First, a tax on sugar, then paper, then an act forcing you to house and feed British soldiers. And it all culminates in the Intolerable Acts, which basically shut down self-government in Massachusetts. It must have felt like a constant assault. And all of this, every tax, every new rule, it all boiled down to one simple, explosive idea: taxation without representation. It was never just about the money. It was the principle of the thing. The colonists were saying, wait a minute, how can you tax us when we don't have a single person in Parliament speaking for us? That's not government, that's theft. Think of this slide as the receipts, the proof. When Jefferson sat down to write the Declaration, he wasn't vague. He laid out a detailed list of all the grievances, the official reasons for the split: imposing taxes, quartering troops, getting rid of their local governments. He was building a case, piece by piece, to show the world that this breakup was justified. Okay, so the breakup is final, they won the war, America is free. Now what? Well, you know how it is after a really bad relationship, right? The rebound. Your first instinct is to find something, or in this case, create something that is the absolute polar opposite of what you just escaped. See, their number one fear was just replacing King George with some new American tyrant. So, to avoid that, they went to the other extreme. They created the Articles of Confederation, which was America's first try at a government, and they designed it on purpose to be incredibly weak. All the real power was left with the individual states. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You can literally see how they were reacting to everything they hated about British rule. They hated the strong central government, so they made theirs super weak. Hated taxes from a national government? Fine, theirs can't tax. Afraid of a big national army? Okay, theirs won't have one. It was a government built completely out of fear. But like a lot of rebounds, this new government was, well, it was a mess. It had some serious, fatal flaws. And those weaknesses weren't just on paper. They led to a real-life crisis that almost destroyed the new country before it even got off the ground. Okay, so problem number one. The government had zero power to collect taxes. None. It could ask the states for money, but the states could just say, nah. And if you can't collect taxes, you're broke. And if you're broke, you can't pay your bills, including the money you promised to the very soldiers who just fought and won your freedom. So what happens? The very soldiers who won the war, now farmers deep in debt, start a rebellion in Massachusetts. And the national government? It couldn't do a thing. It had no money to raise an army, no authority to step in. It just had to watch. This event, Shays' Rebellion, was the ultimate wake-up call. It was the moment everyone realized, uh-oh, we went too far. In their effort to create a government that couldn't oppress them, they had created one that couldn't even protect them. The rebound had failed. So that scare was enough. It forced everyone back to the drawing board. They met for what we now call the Constitutional Convention. But they didn't just tweak the old system. They scrapped it completely and started over. And that kicked off one of the biggest debates in American history. So you basically had two teams in this debate. On one side were the Federalists, guys like Hamilton and Madison. They wanted a new, strong central government for stability and power. On the other side were the Anti-Federalists, like Jefferson. They were terrified that this new constitution was just creating another king, and they demanded protections for individual rights.
So how did they solve this standoff? With a classic all-American compromise, a deal. The Anti-Federalists basically said, we will not sign this thing unless you add a list of rights that the government can never, ever touch. The Federalists, who desperately needed a functioning country, finally said, deal. That promise to add a Bill of Rights was the key. It got the Constitution passed. And just like that, the new union was made. But here's the thing to remember. That central argument, that tension between having a government strong enough to function and protecting the rights of the individual, it wasn't really solved. It was just built into the system. It's the great American debate that started right here. And if you look around, it's a debate we are still having every single day.